Professor Olivas, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you joining us to talk about your new book here.
Thank you very much. I'm always glad to appear on my favorite local PBS show.
Before we get into your book about the DREAM Act and DACA, take us back to what was going on in the 1990s. At the point in mid-1990s, late 1990s, we have the largest number of undocumented college-age students who are entering higher education. What's going on and what are they facing?
Well, they're facing about three different kinds of disabilities where they're leaning into the headwind. The first is that in a number of states, they're considered non-residents, even if they've lived there since they were children. Normally, it just requires 12 months to become a resident, but because of their immigration status, a number of states had held that they were non-resident if they were eligible at all. Number two, when they were in their courses, they found that they were ineligible for most financial aid, whether it was state and certainly federal aid. And this was at a time when tuitions were increasing substantially. When I started at the University of Houston in 1982, tuition was $4 an hour. So it had increased to hundreds of dollars an hour by that time. Even in the states such as California and Texas, which were historically low tuition states. And then third, of course, they found inability to have work authorization, so they couldn't hold jobs. If they were trained to become a teacher, trained to become a lawyer, trained to become a doctor, they couldn't get licensing in those areas. And so to some extent, attendance at college is driven by your choice of employment. So if you want to be a reporter, you might have some television classes, you might take some writing classes, you might take some oratory classes and so forth. But then if you can't be hired on the books, then it becomes very difficult. And so all of these were sort of three strikes and you're out.
At the same time, states, rather than the federal government, were starting to pass laws that allow these students to go in at a reduced rate rather than international students. What's going on in places like Texas, Kansas, New Mexico?
A number of states had begun to make a move, in large part because there was a movement to rewrite some of the residence requirements. Just as an example, the very first one was passed in Texas, ironically, because that's where Plyler versus Doe had occurred. And so Texas has long been considered hostile toward Mexican Americans and Mexicans generally. But they were the first state, and you may recall Governor Rick Perry, when he signed it into law, got beaten up when he ran for president twice. And so he, to his credit, he did this, and not only signed it into law in 2001, just before 9/11, but he also, several years later, signed in financial aid for these students. He saw that educating these students was much better for the state of Texas than simply leaving them on the outside with whatever non-traditional means may have been available to them. And so a number of states started doing that. And once that started, and once California got its act together and had litigation about the matter that resolved the issue, and in my book, it was about a 15-year struggle because there were cases way back in the 1970s about this. In fact, there were organized efforts by these students. Even though we knew that California and Texas were the most important states with regard to the total number of hours that they would take overall, both states became very progressive in this issue. Although Pete Wilson, when running for governor, was responsible for Proposition 187 and was considered very nativist and restrictionist. But after he left office, after running for president, sort of overplaying his hand because he was considered too restrictionist, California finally got its act in gear, and now you can even take out student loans and so forth in California. So about 25 states now. I haven't looked in the last month or so, but about 25 states have such on the books, and there are 3 states that still say if you're undocumented or even documented, you cannot even attend college in Georgia, South Carolina, and a couple of other states. So for the most part, the states that we're concerned about have these residence requirements. The one absentee example is Arizona, which has remained a nativist state, and to this day doesn't allow their students in-state tuition.
You mentioned Pete Wilson, the former governor of California. I remember talking to you in 2001 when I was an intern at the Wall Street Journal. And what was interesting then is that Texas had passed a bill that allowed undocumented immigrants to go to school in in-state tuition. But California, under a very liberal governor and liberal legislations, did not. What was going on in the debates where you had a conservative Texas allowing this to occur, in California and some of these more progressive states, even Massachusetts, being resistant to this idea?
Well, Gray Davis, in fairness, followed the nativist. So he ended up settling it. He was a Democrat, and he took over after the conservative administration left. So these terms of liberal and progressive versus conservative are very fluid. California now clearly is irretrievably liberal, but it wasn't so at the time and resisted even then. Whereas, as you point out, ironically, Texas did. But it also shows how a governor who is committed to something can get it through. He got beaten up in Texas for years, but he held his ground because he knew he was right. And eventually, the legislature changed and became much more inclusive, and had a lot of Latinos and Black legislators who backed him on this, even if they didn't always back him on everything else. As for Massachusetts, I think it was the small number that you would have thought, ironically, would have greased the skids, but they simply saw that this was a source of income that was going to be substantially lowered. The problem is, of course, if you charge these kids full tuition, they can't go anyway. And so it's sort of all or nothing. Give them lower tuition. And Minnesota is another good example. Minnesota did the same thing, but they gave free tuition to everybody. So that wrapped up immigrants as well, even though there aren't that many in the area, all these undocumented Canadians up in Minnesota. But the funny thing is, every single state has its own backstory, and they're quite fascinating. And I tracked down many of them in my book, and just length considerations meant that I couldn't include them all. But each one is a variation on a theme of people who didn't know much about these students saw them as a threat.
In your book, Perchance to Dream, A Legal and Political History of the DREAM Act and DACA, you talk about the formation of what will become known as the DREAM Act. How did the idea of a federal DREAM Act come about in the midst of all these states passing these various bills for in-state tuition?
That's really the very best question. And the answer is that tuition is always set by states. And if you're in state, it's always set by states. You can't have a federal rule for determining who's a member of the Texas community. But at the federal level, what we were looking for with the early drafts was, with some luck, work authorization, so it would regularize their status. We were also hoping, of course, for a fast track to permanent residence and then citizenship, which was in some of the early drafts. But more to the point, eligibility for federal financial aid, because even though setting tuition and charging tuition is a state level decision, the provision of financial assistance is largely a federal one, with Pell Grants, work study, loans, other kinds of programs under Title IV. And they were ineligible for all of those. They still are, by the way. Even when DACA came about, as generous as it was, it precluded them from having federal eligibility for Title IV programs, the nature of which I've already mentioned.
When DACA comes around during the Obama administration, it comes amidst this failure to pass a DREAM Act, and after a number of deportations that his administrations took part and faced criticism for. What happens when DACA comes? What becomes of this legal status of these new students, these undocumented students, and where does this put them in terms of U.S. history of this gray area of as residents, as people walking around in this country? What happens to them?
Well, the first DREAM Act had been introduced in Congress in 2001, co-sponsored by Senator Ted Kennedy, the liberal, and senator from Utah, Orrin Hatch, a conservative. And I took bets at the time that I lost. I ended up having to pay dinner at NMFAS for many people over time, having lost that bet, that the fact that they had two bookends like that meant a guaranteed passage. Of course, 10 years later, it hadn't passed. And so in 2012, President Obama had ramped up, he had ramped up all the kinds of border control and deportations. In fact, many of my colleagues called him the deporter in chief, which I always refused to do, because I knew what he was trying to do was to remove people who were usually multiple offenders, who didn't have, many of whom also had criminal records, even though they were sometimes just simply being undocumented was enough. And he removed 400,000 a year, which was more than any president before that time. And I thought he was doing so in order to build up his street cred with nativists who might say, well, he's serious about that. Let's try and regularize the status of these students. And what they did was they gave them several different benefits. I'm just going to call them general benefits, although they were still ineligible for all federal financial assistance. In that sense, it's always been the same. But they were given work authorization, the ability to work either during school or after they finished their programs. And that, of course, kicked them into a whole series of occupational and licensing issues that we could talk about. Number two, it gave them a Social Security number. And so that rendered them eligible for any number of things. Believe it or not, in some states, if you have a degree in law and a Social Security number, you're eligible no matter what your immigration status is. So that became sort of a backdoor. And then it also gave them the most important thing, which was considered lawful presence. It's not the same as lawful status, which is an immigration term. But lawful presence meant that their deportation clocks were stopped, and they could not be deported without the burden of the government having to prove that they were removable. And so it gave them due process. And they could continue this for 2 years and then renew it as long as they stayed in status. And they could even leave the country and come back in under a concept called advanced parole, where if you have permission to return before you leave and you don't do anything to screw that status up, then you can come back. Now, that works fine. In fact, it's a model program. It paid for itself on the fees. In fact, a number of nonprofit organizations and individuals started putting together pools of money to pay for the $500 per renewal for these students. 800,000 of them became documented and had eligibility for that particular set of benefits. Very few, by my count, and I really did try and keep count of this, only a couple of dozen ever lost their status by virtue of they couldn't have a felony, of course, but they couldn't even have serious misdemeanors. So if you had a drunk driving or something like that, you might lose your status. Or if you left the country and didn't have advance permission, you might lose it. Or if you flunked out of school. The beautiful thing was that most of these students were really great students. And in Houston, your hometown, I know that in 1 year, 12 of the salutatorians and valedictorians in the Houston School District were undocumented. This was before DACA. So these kids were pent up. It was a force. And who would have thought that 800,000 would come forward? And had this been continued and not rescinded by the Trump administration, we'd have well over 1 million of these kids now moving forward. We have dozens who are doctors, dozens who are lawyers. In fact, during the DACA litigation, the second time in the Supreme Court, an affidavit was filed showing that 20,000 of these students actually were in essential healthcare positions as doctors, nurses, and other licensed professionals. These are winners. These are the kids that you want to become immigrants because they all speak English. They're all educated in our system. Plyler versus Doe assured that they would have access to K-12 education. They're marrying our students. They're representing our people in court. They're members of our community. We need them.
Professor Olivas, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.